The crystal chandelier above Isabella Zelman's head tinkled gently as another guest bumped into her, muttering a distracted apology before moving on. She smiled politely, though no one was looking, and adjusted the tray of champagne flutes balanced on her palm. The hotel's grand ballroom was packed with hundreds of elegantly dressed guests celebrating the opening of Meridian Hotels' newest luxury property, and she'd been on her feet for nearly 6 hours straight. "Excuse me," Isabella said softly, navigating through the crowd. At 28, she'd worked her way up from front desk to events coordinator at the prestigious hotel chain, and tonight's gala was her biggest responsibility yet. Everything had gone perfectly until now, but she could feel the energy of the room beginning to shift as the open bar showed its effects. "Hey, watch where you're going." A tall man in an expensive but rumpled suit grabbed her arm as she passed, causing the champagne to slosh dangerously close to the rims. His eyes were glassy, his bow tie undone. "I apologize, sir," Isabella said, maintaining her professional tone. "Would you like a fresh glass?" The man's face darkened. "I want more than that. I want to know why my room isn't ready yet. I've been waiting for 3 hours." Isabella recognized him immediately. Garrett Phillips, a minor celebrity and major headache who had arrived hours before check-in and had been making demands ever since. "Sir, as I explained earlier, check-in isn't until— Do you know who I am?" Phillips' voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "I spend more on hotels in a month than you make in a year." His grip tightened on Isabella's arm. "Sir, please release my arm," she said firmly, though her heart was beginning to pound. This was exactly the kind of scene she'd hoped to avoid tonight. "If you'll allow me to set down this tray, I'd be happy to speak with you about your room. You'll speak to me now." Phillips knocked the tray from her hands, sending champagne and glass across the polished marble floor. The crash silenced the surrounding conversations, and Isabella felt hundreds of eyes turning toward them. "That's quite enough." A deep, authoritative voice cut through the tension. Isabella turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit approaching. She recognized him instantly. Ian Sinclair, the CEO of Meridian Hotels. Her boss. Her boss's boss's boss, more accurately. Ian Sinclair moved with a confident stride that parted the crowd effortlessly. At 35, he had already transformed the once struggling hotel chain into an international powerhouse. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, his jawline sharp, and his gray eyes were now fixed on Phillips with unmistakable disapproval. "Mr. Phillips," Ian said, his voice level but firm. "I believe you owe my colleague an apology," Phillips sneered. "Do you know who— I know exactly who you are," Ian interrupted. "And I know that Meridian Hotels values respect above all else for our guests and for our staff." He turned to Isabella. "Are you all right, miss?" "Zelman, Isabella Zelman," she replied, surprised he didn't already know her name. "I'm fine, Mr. Sinclair, thank you." Ian nodded before turning back to Phillips. "Mr. Phillips, I'll personally see to your accommodations, but first I must insist you apologize to Miss Zelman." Phillips' face flushed red. "This is ridiculous." "I'm not apologizing to some. Then I'm afraid I must ask you to leave," Ian said, gesturing subtly to 2 security personnel who had materialized nearby. "Meridian has plenty of competitors who might be more accommodating of your temperament." For a moment, Phillips looked like he might explode. Then, seeming to realize he was outmatched, he muttered something that could charitably be called an apology and stormed off toward the exit, escorted by security. Ian turned back to Isabella, his stern expression softening. "I apologize for that unpleasantness, Miss Zelman." "This is your event, isn't it? The opening has been flawless." Isabella blinked in surprise. "You know it's my event." A small smile crossed Ian's face. "I make it a point to know who's responsible for excellence." He gestured to a staff member who quickly began cleaning up the broken glass. "Would you mind joining me for a moment? I'd like to discuss how we might prevent such incidents in the future." "Of course." Isabella replied, following him toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, acutely aware of her simple black dress compared to his bespoke suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "You handled that well," Ian said once they were away from the crowd. "Most people would have escalated the situation." "Thank you, but I didn't really handle it at all. You stepped in." Ian shook his head. "I watched for a full minute before intervening. You remained calm and professional despite his aggression. That's rare." Isabella felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. "Just doing my job, Mr. Sinclair." "Ian, please." He studied her for a moment. "How long have you been with Meridian?" "6 years. Started at the front desk at our San Francisco location." Ian nodded appreciatively. "And now orchestrating our most important opening of the year. Impressive trajectory." Before Isabella could respond, they were interrupted by a distinguished older man. "Ian, the mayor is asking for you." "I'll be right there," Ian replied before turning back to Isabella. "It seems duty calls. But I'd like to continue our conversation. Perhaps at the management breakfast tomorrow." "I'll be there," Isabella said, surprised that the CEO would want to speak with her again. Ian smiled a genuine smile that reached his eyes and extended his hand. When she took it, his grip was warm and firm. "Until tomorrow, Isabella." As he walked away, Isabella realized she was still feeling the impression of his hand on hers. She quickly dismissed the sensation. Ian Sinclair might be surprisingly decent for a CEO, but he was still her boss, and she had an event to salvage. The next morning, Isabella arrived at the executive breakfast 15 minutes early, having spent far too long deciding what to wear. She'd settled on a sleek navy pantsuit that projected confidence while remaining professional. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she'd applied just enough makeup to look polished without appearing overdone. The hotel's executive dining room was already bustling with Meridian's top management. Isabella recognized regional directors and vice presidents from across the country, all gathered to celebrate the successful launch. She accepted a coffee from a server and found a place near the window, feeling somewhat out of her depth. "Good morning, Miss Zelman." She turned to find Ian Sinclair beside her, looking refreshed despite the late night. Up close and in daylight, she noticed the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, evidence of either stress or laughter, perhaps both. "Good morning, Mr. Sinclair." "Ian," she corrected herself. "I hope last night's incident didn't overshadow what was otherwise a remarkable event," he said, accepting a coffee of his own. "The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive." "Thank you. The team worked incredibly hard." Ian nodded. "I'd like to hear more about that team." "Would you mind joining me?" He gestured toward a small table set slightly apart from the others. As they sat, Isabella couldn't help but notice the curious glances from other executives. It wasn't every day that a mid-level employee had the CEO's undivided attention. "So, Isabella," Ian began, "tell me about your career goals at Meridian." The direct question caught her off guard. "Well, I enjoy creating experiences for our guests. Currently, I'm focused on building my event portfolio, but eventually, I'd like to move into operations management." Ian listened intently, asking thoughtful follow-up questions about her background and ideas for the company. Isabella found herself relaxing, impressed by his genuine interest and knowledge of hotel operations at every level. "You have unusual insight for someone who hasn't worked in every department," Ian remarked. "I pay attention," Isabella said simply. "And I talk to our staff, housekeeping, maintenance, kitchen. They know what works and what doesn't better than anyone." Ian's eyes lit up. "Exactly. That's exactly the perspective we need more of at the executive level." Their conversation flowed easily, stretching far beyond the scheduled breakfast time. Isabella was surprised to discover that Ian had started his career as a night auditor, working the graveyard shift while attending business school during the day. "Most people assume I was born with a silver spoon," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "But I worked my way up, just like you're doing. It's hard to imagine you counting cash drops and dealing with drunk guests at 3 a.m. Isabella laughed, Some skills never leave you, Ian replied with a wink. Like knowing when a guest has had one too many champagnes. Their laughter was interrupted by Ian's assistant, reminding him of a conference call. Ian looked genuinely disappointed as he stood. "I've enjoyed our conversation, Isabella. Perhaps we could continue it sometime." "I'd like that," she replied, surprised by her own sincerity. "Perfect. I'll be in town for the rest of the week. My assistant will reach out to coordinate." As Isabella watched him leave, she felt a strange mix of excitement and caution. Ian Sinclair was not only her ultimate boss, but also charming, attentive, and undeniably attractive. A dangerous combination for her professional boundaries. 2 days later, Isabella found herself sitting across from Ian at a small Italian restaurant several blocks from the hotel. His assistant had called it a strategy dinner, but as they discussed everything from travel experiences to favorite books, it felt increasingly like something else entirely. "So what made you choose hotels?" Ian asked, pouring her another glass of Chianti. "My grandmother," Isabella replied. She was a housekeeper at the Fairmont in San Francisco for 40 years. She used to tell me stories about the guests, the secrets behind running a perfect hotel. I'd visit her at work sometimes, and I loved the energy, all these different lives intersecting in one beautiful building. Ian's expression softened. "That's a wonderful foundation. My father wanted me to be a lawyer, practical, respectable. When I told him I was going into hospitality, he didn't speak to me for months." "Are you closed now?" A shadow crossed Ian's face. He passed away before Meridian took off. Never got to see that his son's foolish hotel obsession worked out after all. Isabella reached across the table impulsively, touching his hand. "I'm sorry, but I think he'd be proud of what you've built." Ian looked down at her hand on his, then met her eyes with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Thank you," he said softly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Isabella withdrew her hand, suddenly conscious of the line they were approaching. "Ian," she began carefully, "I've enjoyed talking with you, but I have to ask, what is this exactly? Because if this is a business dinner, it doesn't feel like one." Ian sat back, his expression becoming serious. "You're right, and you deserve transparency." He took a breath. "I find you intelligent, capable, and yes, beautiful. I've enjoyed our conversations more than any I've had in a long time, but you work for my company and I respect that boundary." Isabella appreciated his directness. "I'm not opposed to exploring, whatever this is," she admitted. "But my career is important to me. I don't want special treatment or to be the subject of office gossip." Ian nodded. "Completely understandable. What if we agree to keep things professional until after the opening week? You'll be returning to regional headquarters and I'll be back in New York. We could see if there's something worth pursuing outside the immediate work context." It was a reasonable suggestion, and Isabella found herself nodding. "That seems sensible." "Sensible," Ian repeated with a small smile. "Not the most romantic word, but it'll do for now." The rest of the dinner passed pleasantly, with both of them careful to steer the conversation back to safer topics. When Ian walked her to her car afterward, there was a moment his hand brushing hers, their eyes meeting in the dim street light when Isabella thought he might kiss her. Instead, he simply said goodnight, his restraint both frustrating and endearing. The remaining days of opening week flew by in a whirlwind of events, troubleshooting, and long hours. Isabella saw Ian only in professional settings, board meetings, staff presentations, formal dinners with investors, but each time, there was a current of awareness between them, a private understanding beneath their public interactions. On the final night, Meridian hosted a staff appreciation party. Isabella was chatting with the catering manager when she felt a presence beside her. Ian stood there, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him all week, in dark jeans and a casual button-down shirt. "Dance with me?" he asked simply, extending his hand as the band shifted to a slow song. Isabella hesitated only briefly before accepting. As they moved to the center of the dance floor, she was acutely aware of the eyes following them, but when Ian's hand settled at the small of her back, those concerns faded. "You've done amazing work this week," he said, his voice low near her ear. "We all have," she replied. "The opening exceeded expectations." "I wasn't talking about the hotel," his eyes held hers. "I meant how gracefully you've navigated this. Tension between us, I've found it much more difficult." Isabella's breath caught. "Have you?" "Tremendously," he admitted. "Do you know how many times I've had to stop myself from asking you to dinner again? From finding excuses to call you into meetings just to see you?" The confession warmed her from within. "I thought CEOs were supposed to have better self-control," she teased gently. "We're still human," Ian replied, his thumb tracing a small circle where it rested on her back. "Especially around people who remind us of that fact." As the song ended, he stepped back reluctantly. "I leave for New York tomorrow afternoon." "I know," Isabella said, feeling a surprising pang of disappointment despite having known this day was coming. "Have breakfast with me, before you head back to regional?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. The next morning they met at a quiet cafe near the waterfront. The conversation flowed easily, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of finality. Soon, they would return to their separate lives, and whatever had sparked between them might fade to a pleasant memory. "I've been thinking," Ian said as they walked along the harbor after breakfast. "About what happens next?" Isabella looked out at the water. "Back to reality, I suppose. You to your executive suite, me to my cubicle." Ian stopped walking. "Is that what you want?" She turned to face him. "What are the alternatives, long distance whatever this is between a CEO and an employee?" "Stolen moments at quarterly meetings. I don't see how it works, Ian." "What if I told you there's an opening for Director of Guest Experience at our New York property?" Isabella stiffened. "I wouldn't take it." Ian looked taken aback. "Why not?" "It's a perfect match for your skills, a significant promotion. Because I'd never know if I got it because I'm qualified or because you wanted me closer," she interrupted. "And neither would anyone else." Ian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm not offering you a job to get you into my bed, Isabella. I'm telling you about a position you're qualified for that happens to be in the same city where I live." "The timing makes it look exactly like that," she countered. "And perception matters in a corporate environment. You taught me that." They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of gulls and distant boat horns filling the space between them. "You're right," Ian finally said. "I didn't think it through. The last thing I want is to undermine your credibility." Isabella softened. "I appreciate that. But it doesn't solve our problem. What if we just see each other? No job changes, no special treatment. Just two adults dating and dealing with the distance until it makes sense to make a change that doesn't compromise either of us." "Long distance is hard enough without adding corporate politics," Isabella said skeptically. Ian took her hands in his. "Isabella, I've built my career making difficult things work. Let me try with this too, because the alternative just walking away feels like a missed opportunity I'll regret." His sincerity was disarming. "Okay," she found herself saying, "we can try." The smile that lit up his face made her heart skip. "Really, but with conditions. We're transparent with HR, we maintain professional boundaries at work events, and my career advancement comes from my own merit, not your influence." "Agreed on all counts," Ian said immediately. "And I have a condition too." "Which is?" "That I get to kiss you right now, because I've been thinking about it for 7 days straight." Isabella laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. "That condition is acceptable." When his lips finally met hers, soft and certain, Isabella knew they were crossing a threshold. What waited on the other side was uncertain, complicated, and potentially messy, but as Ian pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, she decided some risks were worth taking. The next 3 months tested their commitment in ways neither had anticipated. Ian's schedule took him to 5 countries and 12 cities. Isabella was promoted to senior events coordinator, bringing new responsibilities that often kept her working late. They managed occasional weekend visits, precious 48-hour bubbles where they discovered each other away from the corporate environment. During a particularly stressful week when a hurricane threatened the Miami property, Isabella received a delivery of her favorite tea and a handwritten note. "Thinking of you handling this crisis with your usual grace. Call if you need anything professional or personal." The gesture touched her deeply, not because of its grandeur but because of its thoughtfulness. Ian was learning her not just the obvious things but the small details that made up her life. She was learning him too, how he preferred phone calls to texts, how he needed quiet time after intense board meetings, how he kept a photo of his father in his wallet despite their complicated relationship. "I've never done this before," Ian admitted during one of their video calls. "Dated someone who truly understands my work. It's refreshing not having to explain why a 2 a.m. crisis call can't wait. It helps that I'm sometimes the one making those crisis calls," Isabella laughed. "Exactly, you get it." His expression grew more serious. "I miss you though, more than I expected to." "I miss you too," she said softly. 4 months into their relationship, an opportunity arose that changed everything. The regional director of operations for the Western Division announced his retirement, and Isabella, along with 5 others, was shortlisted for the position. "You should apply," Ian told her when she called to discuss it. "It's earlier than you plan to move up, but you're ready." "It would mean relocating to San Francisco," she pointed out, "even further from New York." Ian was quiet for a moment. "Apply anyway, we'll figure out the rest." The interview process was grueling, 5 rounds over 3 weeks. Isabella was careful to use Ian's name only when professionally relevant, never implying their personal connection. She wanted to succeed or fail on her own merits. When the call finally came offering her the position, Isabella felt a complex mix of pride and uncertainty. That evening, she video called Ian with the news. "I got it," she said simply. His face lit up. "I knew you would. Congratulations, Isabella, you've earned this." "Thank you." "It feels surreal but right." Ian's expression shifted slightly. "So, San Francisco?" "Yes." Isabella took a deep breath. "Ian, I need to ask you something difficult. Did you have any influence on this decision?" "No," he replied without hesitation. "I recused myself from all discussions about your candidacy, citing our relationship. The selection committee made this decision independently." Relief washed over her. "Thank you, I needed to hear that." "I understand." He hesitated before continuing. "I have news too. The board has been discussing opening an Asia-Pacific headquarters. They want me to establish it." Isabella felt her heart sink. "Where?" "Singapore, initially. But here's the thing, there's also talk of expanding our West Coast presence, possibly relocating some executive functions to be closer to the Asian market." "Meaning what, exactly?" Ian leaned closer to the camera. "Meaning there's a real possibility I could be based in San Francisco within a year." Isabella tried to process this information. "Is that something you want? Professionally, it makes sense. Personally?" His eyes held hers through the screen. "Being in the same city as you sounds like something I want very much. But you wouldn't be making this move for me," she clarified. "No, for the company and for my career goals. But you would be a very welcome benefit," he smiled. "Is that something you could want too?" Isabella thought about the past months, the late-night calls, the brief visits, the growing certainty that what they had was worth nurturing. "Yes," she said finally. "That's something I could want very much." 6 months later, Isabella stood in her new San Francisco apartment surrounded by unpacked boxes. Her phone rang. Ian, calling from Singapore. "How's the unpacking going?" he asked. Slowly, she laughed. "But I've got the essentials set up: coffee maker, bed, wine opener. The true necessities," Ian chuckled. "Listen, I know I said I wouldn't be back stateside for another 3 weeks, but there's been a change of plans." Isabella tried to hide her disappointment. "Longer." "Actually, I'm at SFO right now." She nearly dropped the phone. "What? You're in San Francisco?" "The board meeting finished early and I caught the first flight out. I couldn't wait 3 more weeks to see your new place, to see you." Isabella was already grabbing her keys. "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." 40 minutes later, she spotted him outside the arrival terminal, looking tired but handsome in his travel clothes. When he saw her, his face broke into a wide smile that made her heart flip. As she pulled up, Ian loaded his suitcase into her car and then slid into the passenger seat. Before she could even greet him properly, he leaned across and kissed her a kiss that spoke of weeks of separation and longing. "Hi," he said when they finally broke apart, his forehead resting against hers. "Hi yourself," she replied, breathless. "Welcome to San Francisco." That night, after helping her unpack some essential boxes, they sat on her balcony overlooking the city lights, sharing wine and the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to fill every moment with words. "I got the official approval today," Ian said eventually. "For the West Coast Executive Office. We break ground on the building in 3 months." Isabella turned to him. "So it's happening, you'll be here permanently, by this time next year, yes." He took her hand. "If that's still what you want." "It is," she said softly. "But I've been thinking whatever happens with us, I need you to promise me something, anything. Promise me we'll always be honest with each other about when work and us conflict. No sacrificing either without talking about it first." Ian brought her hand to his lips. "I promise. Your career matters to me because it matters to you. I fell for you partly because of your dedication to what you do. And I fell for you because you really saw me when I was just doing my job," Isabella replied. Not many CEOs would have noticed a staff member being harassed, let alone intervened personally. Ian smiled at the memory. "Best intervention I ever made, although I have to confess something." "What's that?" "I had actually noticed you before that night. I'd read your event proposals, seen your name on commendation reports. When Phillips caused that scene, I already knew exactly who you were." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "So you weren't just being a good CEO?" "Oh, I was," Ian said with a grin. "But I was also seizing an opportunity to meet the woman who'd impressed me on paper. I just never expected she'd end up impressing me even more in person." "Smooth talker," Isabella teased, leaning in to kiss him. 1 year later, at the grand opening of Meridian's West Coast Executive Center, Isabella stood proudly beside Ian as he cut the ceremonial ribbon. Now the director of operations for the entire Western region, she had earned the respect of her colleagues through her innovative approaches and steady leadership. As Ian concluded his speech thanking the team that had made the new headquarters possible, he paused, his eyes finding hers in the crowd. "And finally, I want to thank someone who reminds me daily why we're in this business, not just to provide luxury accommodations, but to create experiences and connections that matter. Someone who showed me that protecting your team isn't just good leadership, it's good humanity." Isabella felt a blush rise to her cheeks as those who knew their story smiled knowingly. Later that night, as they walked through the quiet, empty building, Ian stopped in front of the large windows overlooking the bay. "What do you think? Was it worth all the work?" "Absolutely," Isabella said, admiring the view. "It's exactly what the company needed." "I wasn't talking about the building," Ian said softly, turning to face her. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Isabella's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "Isabella Zelman, when I stepped between you and an angry guest 2 years ago, I had no idea I was stepping toward the rest of my life. You've challenged me, supported me, and loved me with a strength I didn't know existed. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Isabella's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." As Ian slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a broken champagne glass to a promise of forever, their story had unfolded in the most unexpected way, proof that sometimes protecting someone else's heart was the first step toward offering your own.